Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today we have Leah. You might have heard of her as GirlGoneCrypto on Twitter. Welcome to the channel, Leah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of your show, and I'm just really excited to be on and hanging out with everyone.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So, if you wouldn't mind, right up front, could you give everybody a little bit of background? What do you do in the space? How are you feeling about crypto these days? Just an intro.
Yeah, sure. So I got started in the space almost 3 years ago, actually through the Steem blockchain, which I
Mhm.
know has been a hot
Oh
topic
yeah, we'll get
the
there.
last few days. So I had heard of crypto because I had friends that were miners back in like 2011, and
Mhm.
I wish I'd listened to them
Right.
and bought Bitcoin when they told me to. But yeah, I stumbled across the Steem blockchain in 2017 and actually just posted random things like ukulele music covers and like little travel blogs and just kind of
Mhm.
was poking around for fun. And, I really think that kind of led me down the rabbit hole because then I was like, well, that $100 I just made on that post, like, where did that money come from?
Yeah.
And now what do I do with it? And what is this thing called an exchange? And anyway, it
Yeah.
just opened the whole door of starting to learn about this. So I've been on the Steem blockchain, like I said, for about 3 years, posting not necessarily crypto related content, but obviously like growing my knowledge of crypto
Right.
by being there. And so just about 6 months ago, I decided to start a crypto specific channel because that's something I'm really excited about, and I kind of felt
Cool.
like I was ready to do that. And so Girl Gone Crypto is about 6 months old right now, which
Nice.
is really exciting.
That's
So
awesome. So, I mean, it's interesting and it's unique where you were not into crypto a long time ago, right? And then you came into the space through a crypto social media platform like Steem, which yes, is in the news right now for a bunch of crazy stuff. But how do you feel some of these decentralized or quote unquote decentralized social media platforms, how do you think they're bringing new people into the space? Do you think there are a lot of people finding them that already understand crypto, or are there a lot of new people coming in as a result?
That's a really good question. And I think it actually varies depending on the platform. So
Mhm.
I think that in a lot of other alternative and decentralized platforms, it is almost a bit of a crypto echo chamber where it's a
Mhm.
lot of crypto content, a lot of crypto people. But Steem is actually a little bit of an exception to the rule, I would say. It's almost less common to see crypto content in there. You have tons of artists and musicians and people that, they aren't necessarily super into crypto, but they
Right.
found it and it's kind of a way for them to help fund some of their creative ventures. And that's actually been kind of highlighted to me the last few days with how many people have been sending me DMs being like, I don't understand what's going on. Can you explain it?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'd say that it kind of depends on the platform.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think things like library, like BitTube, some of the other places where you can post video style content as sort of direct competitors for YouTube. I think the challenge there is that a lot of people that are on those platforms are just people who are already interested in crypto, and by that hand have heard about those platforms because of their involvement in the crypto space. And I think the next
Mhm.
step for these platforms is to get people that aren't into crypto, that might just resonate with the message that these are more decentralized, less censored platforms, if you will. But that's another rabbit hole altogether.
It sure
um,
is.
so I wanted to talk about Steem, and
Mhm.
I know generally what's going on, but I would love to get like the quick elevator pitch style story about what's going on with Steem, so that people that are watching can understand what's going on now.
Sure. So we'll kind of back it up about 2 weeks ago. So at least 2 weeks of the time of this recording.
Yeah, yeah,
Things are changing every 5 minutes, so it's important to put timestamps. um,
definitely.
but yeah, so Justin Sun acquired Steemit Inc., which is not the same thing as the Steem blockchain.
Mhm.
Steemit Inc. is a company that does have most of the like development in terms of like people that are actually working on the chain. But if Steemit Inc. went under, there's all these other dApps and UIs that are built on top of the Steem blockchain that could technically continue to run. So Steemit Inc. is, very heavily connected to the Steem blockchain, but
Mhm.
is not kind of one-stop shop for everything Steem. So Justin Sun acquired Steemit from Ned Scott, which is the former CEO and, one of the founders of Steem. And so the interesting thing and where things got really messy is that with that acquisition of the company Steemit Inc. came a whole big pot of steam. and so
Yeah.
um and so the reason that that matters is in a delegated proof of stake blockchain, basically whoever's got the most steam has the most votes and can control the governance of the chain.
Right.
And so previously, we've got all these different witnesses that are running their own nodes and they're voted in by the community. And so it's decentralized in the sense that there's all these individuals running the network.
Right.
But if you have a high enough percentage of Steem, like overall Steem holdings, that you can vote in all your own top witnesses, then suddenly it's pretty centralized
Yeah.
because you've got one person controlling it all. So that was kind of the concern with Justin Sun coming in, and because previously there had been agreements, although not in writing, it was just kind of a friendly agreement, which I'm like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea,
Yeah.
Steam community. Really on how that stake would be used to make sure that it wouldn't be used for something like that.
Right.
And so anyway, what happened is the witnesses got worried that Justin Sun would just vote in all of his own witnesses. And so they did a soft fork, which basically limited what he could do with that stake.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm trying to keep this quick. I'm sorry. I'll
No,
wrap
that's
it up.
okay.
I promise.
I don't mind. This is a nuanced thing that's going on. A lot of details, so there's no issue.
So soft fork, now we're looking about a week ago that happened. And so what happened after that is something that, as far as I know, is quite unprecedented in the crypto space. I've never really heard of something like this happening before. So Justin's stake was basically had like guardrails on it, so he couldn't use it to vote. But what ended up happening is he basically convinced three other exchanges, one of them, his own exchange, so really convinced two exchanges, I would say,
Yeah.
to use the liquid Steem that was sitting on those exchanges. So, people just have it sitting on the exchange, they're trading with it, they're doing whatever, to actually use that to vote. So there was enough Steem sitting on those exchanges that even though he couldn't use his stake, it was enough to change out the top 20 witnesses.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So, yeah.
I mean, ultimately, for people who might be sitting there like, okay, the delegated proof of stake, I might generally get it. That's cool. What does this mean for me? I think if you're sitting here
Mhm.
now and you're thinking, what does this mean for Steem? What would that mean to you?
It's hard to say because I think there's a lot of dynamics going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think in general, in terms of like blockchain experimentation as a whole, I think we learned something really interesting this week about
Definitely.
DPoS and the actual risk of centralization that there is for DPoS. And I mean, it's always been known that that's there, but I don't think anyone really saw something like this happening. And so I think we learned something really interesting about DPoS, and whether that's going to be detrimental to all other DPoS chains or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
In terms of Steem itself, I mean, now Justin is talking about potentially dumping a bunch of his Steem. So what will that do to the price of Steem? Almost the entire team has quit. And so now what? Who's going to be continuing to run development for the chain? Will anyone want to touch Steemit after this and buy it from Justin? I don't know. Will the current or the previous top 20 fork and we'll just go off and do our own thing?
Yeah.
Maybe. Right now, the Steem community has been able to kind of like rally and get some more witnesses back in. Do they take back over the top? It's honestly, it's your guess is as good as mine. There's just too much going on right now to know.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think that it does draw attention to delegated proof of stake chains where your overall stake is basically a vote for block makers and for the people who control the network, right? Whereas in
Mhm.
true proof of stake, your stake or the amount of wealth that you have directly makes you a block maker, right?
Mm.
It's a tiny difference, but it actually does make a huge difference in terms of how wealth wealth based attacks can occur. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of this could have been avoided if more care was taken in the early days for delegated proof of stake in distribution, not just in how consensus happens, but in how the original pot of tokens that come out, in this case, Steem or other tokens. There are a ton of different delegated proof of stake environments. If you distributed those tokens better early on, I think you wouldn't have had an issue with at least the acquisition of the main like the main foundation or the main company behind Steem, causing this sort of fear and issues. Because if those tokens were spread out, it would have been less scary, I think.
I agree. Or I think if early on, instead of just accepting kind of like a friendly agreement that that stake wouldn't be used for voting purposes, but would only be used for future development of the blockchain, if that hadn't been just a friendly agreement, but there had been some literal parameters on like pre-mined stake, then again, like you said, we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation.
Yeah.
But that's opened a whole nother can of worms. Like before all of this happened with the, takeover of the blockchain, blah, 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 like the soft fork, people were very divided one way or the other of what they thought, which I can kind of understand, right? Like on one hand, the witnesses that voted, the consensus to make the soft fork were like, well, we want to protect the, decentralized nature of the blockchain. But then the people on the other side were like, yeah, but he bought that. Doesn't he have a right to his property? And so it's been a very
Yeah.
interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky thing about having these ecosystems that are run by a central organization that's not run truly like an open source organization, especially because in that case, it can be purchased. And if there's enough there in terms of assets to be purchased or in terms of any IP to be purchased, then it gets really dicey when people start to like, well, then who owns this? Because if this is a blockchain, then there shouldn't be one owner. It should be all of us owning it. But it gets really, really, really tricky when it comes to that legally, especially. Yeah, no, it's a crazy time to be around with these types of things being learned in real time.
Absolutely. And I think another really interesting kind of development in the whole story is I think right now a lot of people are moving some of their, I don't know, aggression, maybe is the wrong word, but from Justin to Ned, because Justin, and if this is true, said that, Ned never told him about these agreements on the pre-mined stake. And so then that opens a whole nother door of, was this kind of this like little shady backdoor deal by Ned, or was there full transparency? So, but yeah, I think you make a good point that it's just a really interesting time to be in a DPoS chain. And, I think that in terms of, we're all just trying to, figure out the best ways to run things. And, there's obviously a lot of different environments and ecosystems within the space. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens from here.
100%, 100%. And I think it's interesting thinking about people like Justin's son, whether or not you're one of the people who doesn't really like what he's doing or people who really do like what he's doing, because there are both. It's interesting to watch his approach because it's becoming increasingly clear, at least to me, and this is my opinion, that his whole approach is to build out like a really wide suite of tools that he can use that are all based on the same technology. Like his BitTorrent acquisition sort of aimed at content distribution, and that's something that the Ethereum based code that they built the Tron blockchain off of was not very good at, and still is not very good at. And so now going and making an acquisition like Steem, it leads me to believe that the integration between the Tron chain, the BitTorrent stuff, and those tokens will start to fuel a now like new content distribution platform like Steem that they'll just kind of turn a little bit to point towards their existing product offering. And they just bought all those users too. That's the biggest thing that they purchased.
That's a good point. And I imagine that is a big part of why Justin was maybe attracted to Steem, because it does have a large community, even though, in this bear market, I mean, it's nothing like what it used to be. Like,
Totally.
Back when in like 2017, early 2018, that place was booming. It was really fun. So it's definitely like the total active users is a lot lower right now than it used to be. But for the blockchain space in a bear market, it's still a really pretty big community. So that makes a lot of sense. What you're saying, that would be a good reason why he was looking at it.
Yeah, definitely. Who knows? But I also wanted to ask you where you think the future of content distribution lies. Is
Mm.
blockchain based, like token based platforms, are they the future, or is there more growth and more technology that we need to realize before we can get to that point?
I think that's a really good question. And I almost think that for a platform to actually hit the mainstream, people don't really need to know that it's blockchain. It just
Mhm.
has to be, for one, really good, and two, offer something that maybe they can't get in their current model. Because one thing that I do think is interesting about social media as a whole is that there is room for new competitors and new apps to come into the space. Like, obviously, Facebook used to be the king, and then now Instagram was been kind of bigger. I mean, look at TikTok. It's one of the fastest growing apps in the entire
Yeah,
world, and it's not that old, and so I do think that there's space for new platforms to come in, but I think they probably need to have a lot of money behind them in order to do well. Like, for one, to have a really, really good UI, but also to have good marketing. And so I think that in terms of like the future of content distribution, um, I think that we just need to really define what success actually looks like for some of these alternative and decentralized sites. Because if it's massive, massive adoption, then, you know, I I don't know. I don't know if any platform out there right now is really ready for that.
I would
Um,
agree.
but if the definition of success is more, hey, let's give people a home that are interested in maybe a decentralized platform or censorship resistance or privacy in general. Privacy is becoming a bigger topic in just the general mainstream as well. I think that might be okay. Obviously I'd prefer that we see bigger growth on these, but I think being a little more realistic on like the trajectory of what that could look like might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, it's early days for sure. And if you think about where YouTube was 10 years ago, I think YouTube's now 15 years old, which is crazy. But where YouTube was 10 years ago, the user base was starting to grow, but the platform, the experience itself was not very good, to be honest with you. It was okay. And what
Hmm.
made YouTube unique is that it was the first place where you had like really consistent streaming video that was easy enough to get to and to search. And just they basically took the Google search engine code and just applied it to video, which is a smart idea. I think we're going to find that some of these platforms differentiate themselves over time, but it's going to take time for sure.
Hmm. And I do think that, like I said, more people are valuing privacy. I also think that gamification might play a big part in it. Like, people like free stuff, even if it's not really worth much. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
just
so, like,
in the intrinsic value of it.
right? And so I think that that's another interesting component that blockchain can bring to some of these social platforms is earning tokens. And I think that stuff like that gets people really excited, even if they don't really know what to do with it or how to use it. I think that that's kind of an interesting thing that people like.
Yeah, that'll get people on board to at least try. And I think that it's a smart idea as long as you do this with an understanding that there are regulations where, all across the world that require you to do certain things to give away tokens. Like people are really
Mhm.
upset, I think, sometimes with that Brave browser requires you to go through KYC to get
Mm.
your basic attention tokens off platform. But in reality, if you think about the actual like the ecosystem and you think about how the relationship works between the two, you're basically working by viewing ads and giving your attention and they're paying you for it. So it's like income. So there's no
Mm.
surprise that the approach is we want to make sure anyone taking these tokens off for money or for other crypto, it needs to be tracked as it comes off, or else Brave, unfortunately, it is a company and they can get, attacked by any regulatory body around the world. So those are also interesting little things to think about is how do these companies approach these platforms with their own survival and as a topic of conversation.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And like, obviously, I think that most of us would prefer not to KYC. Most of
Yeah,
us would rather not pass out sensitive information. But, like you said, it's kind of out of our control that there are regulations and those are becoming more stringent. And these companies, if they ignore that, then I mean, they could get huge fines. They could go to jail. Like it's a huge risk to them as a
Mhm.
company. And so I'm never mad at a company that when they decide to implement that, because obviously they need to protect themselves, as a company. But yeah, it will be interesting to see, as the space grows, what that process looks like, because I'm actually not 100% sure like why Steem is able to distribute tokens without anything like that, right? Like I've
Yeah,
never had to KYC on Steem or a lot of these other decentralized sites. So that actually
agreed.
would be an interesting topic that I should maybe look into more.
Definitely. And I would love to at some point get like a tax guy, a lawyer, whomever
Hmm.
else, just get a panel together and start talking about some of these like really fringe issues that come up out of these that we just don't have answers for yet. But I wanted to pull on the privacy thread a little bit. What
Okay.
what's your viewpoint on the state of privacy today? Do you think people are starting to take it more seriously because there's a lot of news out there about it, or because people are finally
Mm.
realizing that most sites that they're using are kind of abusing their data? Where do you see the general climate for privacy these days?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a mix of a lot of factors. I actually really credit Edward Snowden to getting this conversation rolling. And obviously, it's been a long process for him.
Hmm.
But, I think that at first people were like, oh, he's kind of crazy. But just like anything, it takes time. And then eventually, like more credible people are like interviewing him and different things. And I think that it's just slowly been kind of coming into the mainstream conversation. They say research shows that you have to hear something at least 7 times before it really starts to stick.
Hmm.
And so it's not surprising to me that, all of us have been kind of in this understanding for a long time and have been kind of seeing, past the veil, I would say, of what's really going on. But it takes a while for people to slowly start getting those little nuggets, those little Easter eggs of, understanding what's going on. And especially when they hear it from people that they know, trust, and like, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that the more it's just kind of in casual conversation, that's a good sign. Another kind of interesting thing that I've noticed is that, kind of back to Edward Snowden. One thing I've noticed, Naomi Brockwell is one of my favorite people in the crypto space. I just love her. I think she's great.
Yeah.
But she's been doing a ton of privacy videos lately that have been going like viral. And so to me, I think that's really interesting because, even someone here within our own kind of little ecosystem of the crypto space is getting a lot of mainstream attention for talking about privacy.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to gauge it is
Hmm.
now people are watching videos about privacy and about what this stuff means. One big one for me is I hear a ton of people say, well, yeah, the little stuff I do for my privacy, like I use incognito mode. And like they genuinely think that things like that are helpful for privacy. And if you're watching and you're saying, well, I use that and I thought it was private, it's totally fine because that's what you're being led to believe is an option to protect your privacy when in reality
Right.
it's not. And there are little things that aren't going to affect your life and the convenience of using all these internet based services like using a VPN, having a unique password for every website that helps your security and also your
Hmm.
privacy because then your information can't get stolen. Those sorts of things are really pretty easy to implement.
Yeah, and actually, I have kind of a funny story with the whole incognito thing because I used to be one of those people, like I don't know, years ago,
Yeah.
and so I just remember when I was on my laptop at work, totally different internet server. I don't even know if I'd taken my laptop home.
Hmm.
Anyway, I incognito mode searched for this flight on Allegiant Air, which is a budget airline, around the area where I live.
Yeah.
And when I got home, I opened Facebook on a totally different Wi Fi and I had an Allegiant ad right there. And I
Yeah.
was like, wait, different
Something's wrong.
network,
Yeah.
incognito mode. Maybe those things don't mean what I,
Yeah.
think they mean.
Well, it's really convenient because if you're in Chrome, for example, incognito mode says, these things about privacy, and it's starting to get a little clearer in terms of what it does and doesn't do, which I appreciate, but it doesn't mean it's private to Google. If you're using Google search, even in incognito mode, even with a VPN in some cases, if you're using Google search, they can still figure out who you are and what you're searching for and target you for that stuff. So they're
Mhm.
varying, it's a spectrum. a spectrum of privacy, and some people are willing to go further, down that spectrum than other people are. But
Yeah, I listened to a really interesting interview with Jameson Lopp
mhm,
recently, which he's kind of, I think of like as like the king of privacy in a lot of
yeah,
ways. And he said that same thing. He's like, it's a journey. Like, don't let these deep. He was an interview he did on Peter McCormick's podcast, and he was like, don't let these really deep conversations intimidate you because it's one step at a time. He's like, I've chosen to have this like extreme level of privacy, but all these little things you can do along the way. He's also a really public figure, and so the amount of privacy you might need or desire on that level could be different as well. And so I guess that would just be something I would like echo to the people watching this as well, is that like, yes, it's a total rabbit hole. There's so many little areas you could look into, but just taking like little steps, I think it's okay. Don't get too overwhelmed.
yeah, and it's easy to get overwhelmed, but at the end of the day, like you said, baby steps, little things, and there's so much content now. Again, as you alluded to, that's coming out pretty much constantly to help you implement these little things along the way. But
Mhm.
I wanted to change gears a little bit, and also be mindful of time. But what are, let's just say, three cryptocurrency projects? Not even necessarily tokens, and it doesn't have to be about price or money, but just three projects that you're stoked on, that you think are going to do great things.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm like, only three. Okay. Well, we'll keep
I
this.
know it's hard. That's the hardest part of the question, is to keep it at three.
So, I almost always say this, and it's because I just adore this company, but I love Lolly. I really do.
I'm
Like,
with
I
you.
think that the team is awesome. Like, I think that the way that they are approaching onboarding people into the space, I think they're one of the most important projects for bringing people into the space. And part of the reason why I think that is because from my own story, I knew kind of about crypto, but I didn't really care about it until I owned my first little bit. And so what I think Lolly does is it gives people that same experience to easily get their hands on like their first little bit of crypto. And then suddenly they're more interested in it as a whole, and they're
Yeah.
maybe looking at the price more and they're curious about it. So definitely Lolly, also just because it's probably the easiest way that I could like tell my friends and family and my mom and different people, and
Yeah.
kind of get
It's an
them.
onboarding mechanism for sure.
Definitely. But then also kind of on the same strain of thought with, kind of easy onboarding, I really like Edge Wallet. Actually,
Interesting. Yeah.
I think that they do a really nice job of just making the on-ramp process very easy and user-friendly. Like, I don't know if you've used their wallet at all, but it's really quite intuitive to actually buy crypto and to trade between different cryptos. And it's a very secure wallet. They like make it really easy for you to have two-factor, a secure version of two-factor, not an SMS thing,
Yeah.
on there. And so, and I really like the team behind Edge as well. I got to interview Paul Pewey, the CEO or co-founder, pretty recently, and got to learn more about it. So I was really impressed by them.
Awesome.
All right, number three, who do I want to choose? Kind of again on more of the wallet side of things. I do really like Shapeshift as well.
Another good one.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not just because they have the coolest artwork of any brand in the crypto space. I think they
Yeah.
do. Like, for some reason, this background kind of reminds me of them. I feel like they would dig it. But
Yeah.
I
Same vibe.
same vibe. Yeah, I know. I feel like I have a similar, like, anyway, I'll get off the artwork. I like that I really like the self-custody wallet
Yeah.
side
It's
of things
huge.
that they offer. Hmm.
And they're very much a company that's rooted in like the OG crypto space. Like they've been around for a long time. They've made their like infancy company mistakes a
Hmm.
long time ago. And so now it's like they've taken the lessons learned and they're building awesome products. And I have an interview coming out, I think, with Lisa Loud, the new COO from Shapeshift, soon to talk about some of that stuff. But I'm really excited about what they're doing too. It's a great company.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I think that you touched on a really good point there. Like the team, it's a lot of OG, and I really like seeing that in a project, and more so than just OG. I feel like I like to see that companies are there for the right reasons, and you feel like they truly are here for, like not for the movement really, and for the freedom aspect of it. And so that's one thing that I always kind of look for in a project too, is the vibe you kind of get from why they're here in the space.
Yeah, the purpose, as cliche as that sounds. And it's also good to have a mix of people that have been in the crypto space a long time and then new entrants into the
Mm.
space that got in for some reason. Because if your product doesn't get used, then doesn't matter how good it is, honestly. So you need the marketing people and the people who weren't in crypto for the same reasons as the founders per se, because
Mm.
they got into it for a reason. I'm sure they can bring other people in. So really, really good companies. I would agree with all three of those for sure. Awesome. So I wanted to also ask you where people can find you on social media so that before people head out, they can go and subscribe, follow, and all that good stuff.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So I'm pretty much anywhere that people hang out online. You can find me.
Nice.
So, so definitely, I've got my own YouTube channel, GirlGoneCrypto. I'm very active on Twitter. That's a great place to find me. But you can also find me on, Instagram and LinkedIn and various places like that, Facebook. And as we've talked about today, I'm on a bunch of decentralized sites as well.
Cool. And I'll link those up down below. I'll get as many links as I possibly can. So wherever you are, you'll find her. Awesome. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to join the channel. We'll definitely do it again soon because we'll have to follow up on this crazy Steem madness.
Yes, we will. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really just a lot of fun to hang out.
Absolutely. Anytime. And guys, as always, have a good one. Cheers.